last count, don't ask me who's counting, there are over 136 million objects here at the Smithsonian. And at this very moment, that number is climbing. From tiny Bibles to colossal sculptures and flying machines. Year by year, the collection swells. Ooh. In part because there are always people who simply hand over their prized possessions to the nation.
I'm Tom Cavanagh, and I'm heading into the vaults of the largest museum complex of the world to discover the story behind some of these objects.
What I've been told is that sometimes the story of how it got here and who donated it is just as intriguing as the object itself. I was surprised to find out that some pretty famous people in our history have donated some amazing things to the Smithsonian. And I'm discovering a side of them I never knew before.
Welcome. We're here in the rotunda of the National Museum of Natural History. Here's a little game I like to play when I'm at the NMNH. See if you can spot the elephant. Here's a hint. It's over my right shoulder. I don't feel bad if you didn't get it the first time. When I was a kid, I actually lived in Africa, and you get good at spotting things like this.
This is what I love about natural history museums. Communing with the animals.
Ooh. Yeah, I have a bird attached to my paw. Can't get the bird off my... We're going to follow a trail of specimen tags that all lead back to one man, a man famous for far more than just his collecting. Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th U.S. president, gave this rhinoceros to the Smithsonian. I'd known he'd gone on big game expeditions, but I didn't know the whole story. Fortunately, I do know the man who does.
He was a remarkable naturalist.
Hey, it's Dr. Seuss. Hans Dieter Seuss, Associate Director of Research and Collections at the museum. He's a big TR buff.
Here's my question about TR. Hunter, conservationist, both? Both.
A good hunter is also a conservationist, because otherwise you quickly run out of things to hunt.
Hans is only half joking, but hunting was a part of TR's life. He was also an avid collector. He wanted to study the natural world, and to do that, he collected hundreds of specimens, and a bunch of them have ended up right here.
He actually had started as a naturalist when he was a small boy. In fact, he was the most unlikely of naturalists because he had very severe asthma.
I mean, at 4 years old, he wasn't supposed to even live, right?
Yep.
Teddy Roosevelt. It's hard for me to imagine him as anything but robust and aggressive. But young Teddy was so frail and sickly that his family worried he wouldn't survive his 4th birthday.
The motivation was so strong to, look at things outside that he really worked on it. He was doing sort of chin-ups.
Really?
And he became very buff by present standards.
Yeah.
Teddy's teenage motto might very well have been, speak softly and flex your pecs.
This guy even created his own museum at a young age, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. He and 2 of his cousins started the Roosevelt Museum. So first in his room, and then when the chambermaid got a little bit upset about all the stench and mess in the room, they moved it to another part of the house and in fact were assigned a special cabinet.
Well, that's great, because I used to just get beaten.
Young TR took his curating seriously. He made drawings of the animals he collected and kept meticulous notes on where they were found, their size, sex, even their stomach contents.
And you have some of these specimens here from when he was like a kid.
Yeah, in fact, a number of them have these little labels.
And so
in some cases, you still see his handwriting on them, too.
I see that right there, Roosevelt Museum. That's incredible.
TR gave the collection to the Smithsonian in 1882 when he had just been elected an assemblyman in New York State. Here's a letter that he actually sent to the director of the museum.
How old was he when he sent this letter?
He would have been 24. It says here, "Dear sir, I'm very much obliged for your kind letter and shall send you the skins. Very truly yours, Theodore Roosevelt."
In the late 1800s, the Smithsonian and TR kind of grew up together. In those days, the institution had just a mere fraction of the birds it has now, so TR's donation would have definitely filled a hole or two in the collection. Today, there are over 625,000 birds here, representing 80% of the known species in the world.
Now, why does the Smithsonian have so many specimens?
Well, nature is rich in specimens.
Sure.
There are literally millions of species of organisms out there, and since we are interested in studying the history and diversity of life, we need a lot of specimens to do that.
And TR, he did more than his fair share.
Yeah.
The young Roosevelt seemed destined to become the world's next great naturalist. But instead he takes up politics?
Here's this guy. I'm going to go into Harvard, and you know the girls like Harvard. I'm going to go into Harvard, get the chicks, be a naturalist, and then maybe I'll just go be president.
Yeah, well, actually, he started more modestly. First became an assemblyman.
Yes, of course. Sometimes I make jokes, as you can tell.
Really?
Yeah.
Fast forward to 1910. The beloved former president, Theodore Roosevelt, makes a triumphant return to New York City after his year-long expedition to Africa for the Smithsonian.
Got that little political thing out of the way.
Yeah,
and then he went
go out, And those days, if you were a masculine man, a man's man, you would go out hunting. Africa was, at that time, still sort of a almost mythical destination for any explorer.
TR and his fellow hunter-naturalists took down over 500 big game mammals.
Even then, did he get any flack for killing that much stuff?
Well, there were always people who have been opposed to hunting, but
Sure.
by and large, hunting is a time-honored American tradition. In those days, you could sort of take a shotgun along and blast away merrily.
Those were the days, weren't they? Yeah.
Even in those days, TR did get some flack for all the hunting he did. It didn't exactly jibe with his conservationist credentials. Responding to his critics, Roosevelt said, "I can be condemned only if the existence of the National Museum and all similar zoological institutions are to be condemned."
He wasn't just shooting lions and mounting them above his fireplace. He was bringing them back for display at the Smithsonian to try and learn as much as we could learn.
Yeah, no, he would, for instance, he wouldn't just go out and get one big impressive male lion. He would get a couple lionesses, he would get a couple of cubs, because he was very interested in looking at the variation. And I think in his mind's eye, he already sort of saw them as a diorama, as an exhibit.
And there actually was an exhibit of TR's animals after he returned. They're not all on exhibit now, but I know that they were retained for scientific study. I'm heading to a Smithsonian site outside of Washington to have a look.
Hans has sent me out here to a place where the Smithsonian is redefining how to store stuff. They've actually got a lot of what TR brought back from Africa.
500,000 square feet of storage space. That's 5 football field-sized pods, 3 stories high, with walls 1.5 feet thick, climate controlled, and to keep out the insects, they even refrigerate their garbage. Now that is uber storage.
There's a herd of elephants in here, to be precise, a herd of elephant bones, some brought back by TR himself. And all this collection is managed by one person, collections manager, Linda Gordon. Hi, Linda.
Hi, Tom.
So this entire collection is managed by you. This is the mammal collection.
This is the mammal collection of the Smithsonian.
And so I can only imagine that is immense, huge.
About 580,000 specimens.
580,000?
Right.
Where's the elephant heads?
Right.
Ah, very, very good. Now, I was told that some of these were brought back by Teddy Roosevelt himself. Is that true?
They were. This one was collected in 1909.
It says Roosevelt. That is impressive. Now, we're not just storing stuff. This is an active research collection.
It is. It
In other words, so what will happen? Will someone call you and say, "Hey, Linda, I want to take a look at the
Yes.
DNA, or I want to take a look at the skull structure"?
I get calls every day from researchers. We host probably about 400 researchers every year in our collection.
Oh, wow. This is exciting.
There's Here's some lion skins.
Ah, brilliant.
So look at this.
Ooh,
These.
goodness gracious, this is incredible.
Some of these would have been collected by Teddy Roosevelt.
How many lions did he bring back? Do you have any idea? Ballpark it, 10,000?
I don't know. 20.
20,000?
No, 20.
No, I know. 20,000.
It's incredible that all these pelts are still being studied by research scientists. Specimens from 1909 can be compared with more recent ones to track environmental, ecological, and genetic changes.
Little cub. Wow. It's important when collecting scientific specimens to be sure you get all ages represented and both sexes represented.
Wow. Are you seriously telling me you don't get lost here?
Before they accidentally lock me up in one of these cabinets, I better get out of here. I'm headed back to the Natural History Museum. Here we're going to discover a famous author with an unusual passion for the sea. Sometimes it's hard not to get sidetracked.
Some of the interiors in the Natural History Museum are like a labyrinth, could drive a guy to drink. Oh, there we go. Ooh, spineless creatures. Who keeps track of all these guys? Dave!
Hey, Tom.
How are you doing? Thanks for having us up here.
Dave Pawson is a senior research scientist at the museum.
And these are all invertebrates.
Yes,
They're
animals without backbones.
Animals without backbones. So you have a bunch of politicians here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yes, we do, actually.
I bet you do.
I guess somebody's got a dust in here. Not counting the politicians. The Smithsonian has 35 million invertebrates stacked along 15 miles of shelves. While a few, like this giant squid, get their own tanks.
Now, part of this collection was donated by John Steinbeck. Is that true?
Yes, Steinbeck and his partner, Ed Ricketts.
Obviously, most people know him from, name one, Grapes of Wrath.
Grapes of Wrath, yeah,
but,
sure.
but not everybody knows that he had an interest in marine biology.
He really did.
In 1940, not long after winning the Pulitzer Prize for his novel, The Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck set out with his best friend, marine biologist Ed Ricketts, on an epic adventure to collect marine animals along the California coast to Mexico. Their goal? To find creatures that no one had ever identified before.
This story actually has a lot of romance to it. I mean, this is the quintessential buddy movie. These guys teamed up.
Right.
They went up and down the coast of California doing a fair amount of boozing.
Yes.
I've been told.
Yeah. And philosophizing as well.
What kind of stuff did they collect?
Well, we have a bottle here, for example, with a couple of nice-looking green shrimps. In fact, they look rather tasty.
Yeah, I could fry those up right now.
These were collected by Steinbeck and Ricketts.
That's incredible, isn't it?
So, and it's still in beautiful condition, as you can see, 66 years later.
The sea always held a fascination for Steinbeck. Perhaps it seems surprising for a man who wrote so poignantly about the human condition and the plight of the Dust Bowl migrants in the 1930s. But Steinbeck grew up along the California coast and even studied marine biology at Stanford. He and his friend Ed Ricketts weren't just underwater tourists. They sought a larger, more personal connection to these odd creatures.
They philosophized about the human species connection with the rest of nature, and they looked upon animals and humans and the earth as being essentially one.
Very bohemian, very cool.
Oh, it was terrific.
Yeah,
They had a fantastic time.
Steinbeck and Ricketts wrote about their journey in a book called Sea of Cortez.
Steinbeck says here, the camera equipment was more than adequate, for it was never used. It included a fine German reflex camera and an 8mm movie camera with tripod, light meters and everything, but we had no cameraman, so they took no pictures.
Ah, no camera equipment. Well, I guess we'll just have to imagine what the trip looked like. I think they would have seen creatures a lot like this. Maybe they would have cruised in a boat a lot like this. Actually, we do have a photo of the boat. It was a beat-up old sardine fishing boat called the Western Flyer. The trip was obviously a lot of fun, and discovering new species is probably pretty thrilling. Larger species are usually discovered first, so Steinbeck and Ricketts gathered many of the smaller creatures they came across. And Steinbeck, already famous for his writing, established a different kind of immortality by getting his name on some of his finds.
I see here
of
a list
animals.
species named after Ed Ricketts and John Steinbeck. There's tons of them. There's such a thing as Thalassomer steinbecki.
Yeah.
Am I saying that right?
There's one here. This is a little sea anemone. Here's a little one. But this was new
So you
species.
you just touched something that
And-
John Steinbeck touched, and it wasn't a lady.
It's amazing, isn't it? Phyaloba steinbecki.
Of the 400 or so creatures they donated, at least 20 have been identified as new to science.
Bunches of little tiny animals in there, little shrimp-like animals. Mycidium rickettsii, little
Wow.
crustacean.
Well, there's looks to be hundreds in there.
Yeah.
These little critters in my hand may seem insignificant, but they're a vital link in the food chain, as important to the ecosystem as the barracuda or the gray whale.
That's very impressive. Rickettsii. Are you ever tempted to put your name on the species?
Or name it for yourself? Or?
Sure.
No. You can name it for relatives and things, but it's a no-no to name something for yourself.
There's no-
You just hope that somebody else names something after you.
Do you have something named after you?
Yes.
Aha! And what
For
is
my
it?
sins.
Is it the Davies?
Well, they're usually
Davies
disgusting-looking sea cucumbers, you know.
Now, when somebody names something after you and it's just a cuss ugly thing, do you call them up and go, hey, what gives?
No, you try to have revenge by naming something even uglier after them. That's,
Before you start naming new species, you've got to find them first. Dave's done an expedition or two in his day as well. But he didn't go in a tattered old sardine boat. Dave studies the deep, deep sea by high-tech submersible.
Roger that. We have a seal.
the deepest dive I've made is about 2.5 miles down.
2.5 miles?
Yeah, and but most of our submersible work has been down to depths of about 1/2 mile or so. Yeah.
Back in the 40s, the coastline that Steinbeck and Ricketts traveled was relatively unexplored. But when it comes to the deep sea, you may be surprised at how much is still left to discover.
The deep sea, as you'd define it, the dark part of the ocean where there's no sunlight, covers about 105 million square miles on our planet. An expert estimated that we have explored maybe 50 square miles
You've explored
satisfactorily.
50.
Right.
Unlike Steinbeck and his crew, Dave's team not only took cameras with them on their expeditions, but actually knew how to operate them.
I've got a great video picture of it. It's walking with its 2 feet, not using its arms.
It was the first time this sea star, which Dave calls the cheetah of the deep, was captured on the move.
Moving very, very fast.
And then there are creatures like this sea cucumber that will just knock your dive socks off with their strange beauty.
Daddy.
Steinbeck and Ricketts would have loved this.
Do you think those guys would be happy with the current state of scientific research?
Oh, I think they'd be delighted that Mother Nature sort of at last revealing some of her innermost secrets. You know, that was what they were looking for when they went collecting.
Swimming away, isn't that pretty?
The spirit of exploration has certainly carried on from the likes of John Steinbeck to Dave Pawson. And to think, 35 million specimens, and we've only barely skimmed the surface. This guy shouldn't be dusting. He should be building more shelves.
I need to find my way to the next story. My spidey sense tells me to head west. Wait, is this west?
Here at the American History Museum, there are quite a few famous donors to choose from. Just to keep things interesting, let's play a game called Guess the Donor. We'll start with some clues. Maybe this will help. Now you got it.
You know you're old when your walker has an airbag.
Yep, it's Phyllis Diller.
Somebody compliments you on your alligator shoes, and you're barefoot.
After a 47-year career, one of America's most successful comics decided to write a letter to the Smithsonian, making them an offer they couldn't refuse. Curator Dwight Bowers let me read the letter from Diller.
This is fantastic. This comes from a legend, essentially, and yet listen to this modesty. Phyllis says, ever since I heard of the inclusion of Archie Bunker's chair in the Smithsonian display, I have wondered if the Institute might have interest in something of mine. I am enclosing a bio in case you are not familiar with my work. You gotta like that.
Wonderfully modest.
Yeah, you know. And then she says, I have kept the dress I wore with Bob Hope in his 1966 Vietnam expedition. She's basically saying, in case you're not familiar with my work, hello, Bob Hope, and in Vietnam, so what, have you been living in a cave?
Just in case you have been cave dwelling, let me give you the Diller 411. In 1955, Diller was a working mom with 5 kids, when life as a suburban housewife was thought to be pretty ideal. Diller decided that it was time to turn that myth on its head. So she took to the stage at 37 years old as the world's worst housewife at the Purple Onion nightclub in San Francisco. And she kept at it until her last one-woman show in 2002.
The only thing domestic about me is that I was born in this country.
At 84 years old.
We got a ring around the tub you can set a drink on. There isn't a person in our family that's got the guts to eat raisin toast. I do dinner in 3 phases: serve the food, clear the table, bury the dead.
When you think of Phyllis Diller, you always think of her role in making the presence of women in comedy, because she was the first woman to successfully have a career as a stand-up comic.
Which is a big deal. And
It's
so
a
she,
very big deal.
in many ways, paid the way.
Back in 2003, Diller essentially opened her doors to the Smithsonian.
Shoes, shoes, shoes. Here are the glasses.
She said, take what you'd like. And as curator, Dwight got the opportunity to do just that.
First thing I immediately chose was this costume that she wore on Broadway in Hello, Dolly.
Her costumes were as flamboyant as the comic herself.
This is one of my favorites. This is a costume that she would have worn on one of the tours with Bob Hope, replete with wonderful feathers. We tried to get a nice span of her career.
But the real find was what Diller showed Dwight last.
She said, I have this thing upstairs, and this thing upstairs was the joke file, arranged in a room as if it were a shrine. And it is indeed a shrine to comedy.
And you knew you had to have it.
Oh, we had to have this. This is the history of comedy as seen through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s.
The gag file.
Over her career, Diller amassed a collection of jokes so immense it took her own version of the Dewey Decimal System to keep it organized. There are many promising headings: Avon Lady, Bad Service, Astrology, Astronauts, Miss America.
All these cards, little cards, you reach in here.
Pull a joke, any joke.
So pull a joke, any joke, see?
Hoping that you get something funny.
They canceled my car insurance just because I ran into something. My insurance agent.
And the laugh you can hear in the background. I love the Fang jokes about her.
Now explain
her
about
mythical
Fang.
first husband was Fang. He was a ne'er-do-well, nothing worked. In fact, Fang didn't work.
When I say Fang is half Scotch, I'm not talking about his ancestors. Frank drinks only on holidays. Last week he celebrated Shrove Tuesday, Independence Day for 3 new African nations.
When I asked Dwight why Diller might have wanted to give her gag file to the Smithsonian, he knew just whom to ask.
Hello there, it's Phyllis Diller.
Hello, Miss Diller. It's Dwight Bowers at the Smithsonian.
Hello, Miss Diller. It's Tom Cavanagh. How does it feel to have your jokes in one of the most esteemed institutions in America? It must
You
feel great.
have no idea how conceited it has made me.
Phyllis, how on earth did you ever keep track of 50,000 jokes?
Every night I did an hour of jokes, and they're in the computer in my brain, and I just have a fantastic memory.
How many jokes would you tell in an hour?
About 800.
Not a bad record.
That's incredible. And don't you have a record for telling the most jokes?
Yes, I do. In the Guinness World Book of Records. 12 laughs a minute.
12 laughs a minute.
I was just so ugly. Oh, I don't know how to tell you. I wore a choke chain till I was 12. My own Ouija board told me to go to hell. A peeping Tom threw up on my windowsill.
You have a joke for me? Are you serious?
You're Irish, right?
Am I ever?
All right. Two Irish guys walk out of a bar. It could happen. I want to make everybody feel good, and I want to spread cheer.
You've been a delight, and I hope that you are getting everything you want out of life. Good night. I love you.
Diller was once quoted as saying, "A stand-up comic is judged by every line. Singers get applause at the end of their song no matter how bad they are." She obviously took this to heart, and now the Smithsonian has all her lines to prove it. That's it. The end of our show. And yet there's so much more to see. Let's just go. We'll come back.
Spending all this time here, you can't help but wonder, what would I donate to the Smithsonian? I suggested my IQ, which they're considering, because as they said, it wouldn't take up much space. Wait.
As we've seen, a lot of what gets donated to the Smithsonian is not meant for display. Much is destined for research, to determine who we are and where we've come from.
I don't know about you, but I feel privileged to have experienced some of it firsthand. Always with the credits. You want to watch the credits? All right.